Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be just doing something a little bit different that's sort of a combination of tutorial and news, and that is kind of an overview of the metagame as it stands right now at the end of patch 1.2, moving into patch 1.3, and so we'll be kind of discussing how I think the metagame has evolved, or it has evolved at least in my mind, throughout patch 1.2. There have been a few changes during patch 1.2, but nothing too substantive other than the loud car outside. And then also we will be talking about how I think the metagame will shift in patch 1.3, but overall I don't think it'll develop too much because this is maybe mostly a flavor patch, and I think the same things that are effective are going to remain effective. And so this sort of thing. In this video we're going to be talking about laws, we're going to be talking about expansion, and perhaps the most substantive thing I think maybe is talking about how this change from 1.2 to 1.3, where there's now a negative multiplier for investment pool / dividends. This is really substantive, and this leads to what I like to think of, other than the loud car outside, is a sort of understanding the economy in terms of it's like a transitional phase, where initially you lean really heavily into reinvestment and investment pool, but as this malus gets bigger and bigger, that becomes less and less important, and eventually it even becomes, you want to get off of it. And so this kind of informs what I think the most effective strategy is. It's not cut and dry type of thing, and you'll notice this as we're talking about stuff. And then finally, we're going to talk about journal entries. But I actually think we're going to start it off talking about journal entries, because currently in the game there's two really important journal entries, and that is the path to liberalism, which we've already resolved here, and corn laws. These are going to be changed in patch 1.2. Corn laws are getting a significant nerf, and let's jump into, I kind of have a few things ready up here, but corn laws, what's happening is corn laws are going to now give, instead of giving a market liberal, which allows you to change a whole bunch of laws, they will instead give you an agitator. And my understanding of the game mechanics is that you can turn the agitator into a politician under certain conditions, but I don't know exactly how hard this is going to be. And specifically market liberals, kind of early on, will allow you to reform the economic system to laissez-faire if you're on traditionalism. They will allow you to abolish serfdom if you're on serfdom, and they will allow you to move towards free trade. And these three in combinations, on top of the fact that every country can use it if they're on mercantilism, this is incredibly powerful, and it is currently, I think, kind of a play pattern that I think is a little bit nonsensical, and so they're significantly nerfing it, I think, but it's just going to depend how easy it is to pass laws that your agitators are supporting, and also to turn your agitators into the interest group leader, because if it's trivial to turn this agitator into an interest group leader, it doesn't really matter that you are getting a laissez-faire or a market liberal agitator, instead of use something else. Although if the agitator's not landowner, then this does make a difference. And so I'm hoping to see the corn law significantly nerfed. This nerf will see every kind of country that starts off with serfdom in particular get a whole lot worse. The second one is the path to liberalism event chain, which you currently use in order to get someone with the radical ideology. The reason you like the radical ideology, as of right now, is that it allows you to go multiculturalism, which is extraordinarily strong in meta. Moving into patch 1.2, we will of course, or say 1.3, we will of course get agitators, the agitator mechanic, which will allow us to pass laws on the back of agitators, and in theory we can invite someone who is the radical ideology, although it's no longer the radical ideology that supports multiculturalist, it's the humanist ideology, but it's the same idea. Being able to invite this will decrease the importance of the path to liberalism event chain, although the event chain still does eventually result in the new Colossus event, which, if we come in and just take a look at population, is extraordinarily strong. Let's find a place with some decent migration. I said let's find some place with some decent migration. There we go. In Indian Texas. You will notice that the Teeming Shore event, giving plus 25% migration attraction, this is at the very end of the path to liberalism. You will get the new Colossus event chain, and this is still an extraordinarily strong event chain, but previously what you would do is you would avoid passing, in particular, either census suffrage or universal suffrage, up until the point where you had the technology which allowed you to go multiculturalism. which is, let's see, human rights. And so you would wait, that way you wouldn't burn your radical, and your radical would like somehow die and you would never be able to pass the law. Now it seems that you can kind of pass the law a bit more comfortably, and this is a good thing. So that's kind of journal entries, I think, two substantive differences. And the other substantive differences, I think, come in laws. So we'll talk about laws next. Just coming into the browser really quick, I said coming into the browser really quick, we can take a look at the laws in both. We're going to be getting single-party state, technocracy, and also we're going to get land reform laws. There's also state religion, there's a couple more, but I think the really big ones to focus on are going to be technocracy, and are also going to be this land reform. So let's talk about, we're going to talk about both of these as we go through all of the laws, but just keeping an eye on each of these, I think, are going to be kind of, well, let's talk about land reform first, because there's no land reform section, actually. Land reform is going to change the ownership of everything that is in agriculture, which is tremendous, but they did not, in the patch notes, give us any of the numbers on these. Currently, the very early game, kind of metagame, what it is coming back into the game real quick, what you generally want to do early game is to focus on specifically only building stuff that is owned by capitalists, and the reason why is because capitalists contribute 20% to the investment pool, and landowners only contribute 10% to the investment pool, so you generally prefer not to have landowners, and you don't want to build agrarian stuff because the landowner ownership tends to be aristocratic. However, with these land reform laws, you can now, maybe, depending on the numbers, get capitalists owning the agriculture. And with capitalists own the agriculture, suddenly agriculture gets a lot better. And so it's unclear what these numbers are, but these might change, what the metagame looks like in particular, to kind of thinking of, didn't mean to do that, agrarian versus industrial balance. Because if you, let's say, commercialized agriculture gives 100% ownership to capitalists, then going agriculture heavy will become a lot stronger. Homesteading, I think, gives the power to the people, and there might be some strategies involved in this. And collectivized agriculture, I'm not sure exactly. The thing is I'm not sure exactly what all these numbers are going to shake out to be, but if these numbers look a particular way, this might change the anti-agriculture focus that kind of, is extremely important in, like, let's say the first third of the game, but then it falls off later. More on that when we talk about economic phases, but I think it's just worth talking about land reform. Next up, let's talk about specifically distribution of power laws, because I think that technocracy might become the new meta. Now, it's important to notice this law is not supported by any interest groups, same with single-party states, so I'm assuming you're going to have to try and find other ways of doing this. I don't know to what extent, you can invite agitators in particular to do this sort of thing. But just taking a look at technocracy, what I think it's going to allow you to do is get the best of both worlds when it comes to distribution of power. Jumping back into, kind of this thing here, we're going to take a look at the laws, and we're going to take a look at distribution of power. Currently, as it stands, as you kind of go higher up, you are going to be a lot more, you're going to get a lot more authority, and this is the primary, benefit, but generally it'll be a lot harder to have high legitimacy, and then as you move down, it will be easier to have high legitimacy, but you sacrifice the authority, and then secondarily, it's also going to help you make the trade unions powerful. I clicked the forbidden button, it's going to lag a little bit here, but getting the trade unions up and going, the button was truly forbidden. Getting the trade unionists up and going, let's just click this to stop the India lag. Getting the trade unionists up and going is generally quite a bit difficult when you are on these previous distribution of power systems, because they tend to empower, both the landowners and the people with a lot of money and this type of stuff. But, going into taking a look at the browser real quick, we will see that this empowers specifically academics, engineers, and officers, and coming into the interest group attraction wiki, in particular, we can see that specifically engineers do not have a lot of attraction towards any particular interest group, but they do have the plus 50 just based towards being trade unionists, so they will actually support the trade unions very heavily, as well as the fact that intelligentsia will primarily be, academics will be primarily intelligentsia. Armed forces, the officers will also primarily be armed forces, but you'll have a less number of officers and also a less number number of academics relative to the number of engineers. And so what I think this might do is this might allow you to have both a really high authority government and also make the trade unions powerful simultaneously. And, you can take Beijing to handle the legitimacy factor, or you could just try and make something cohesive. But what this can allow you to do, which is quite strong, especially in the first third of the game, as we're going to discuss, is going to be having 3 interest groups all powerful at once. Now, if an interest group is over 20% clout, all of their bonuses are doubled. And if you can specifically get the industrialists, the trade unionists, and the intelligentsia all powerful at once, this is a pretty big game because they have really good bonuses. You'll be getting extra migration attraction. You'll be getting decreased society tech costs. You'll be getting increased manufacturing industries throughput, which is an insane bonus. Increased workforce ratio, insane. Also production technology cost, and also capitalist investment pool contribution efficiency, which is really, really, really strong in the early game. Now, if we come back into it, just taking a quick look, we'll see that we're getting 100 authority, legitimacy based on government clout, and also from including the head of state and government. Including the head of state and government is not a particularly large source, and it's also going to increase government size. And so it seems that if you can very consistently, get this triple balance of trade unionists, intelligentsia, and industrialists in government, which generally having the trade union and the industrialists in government is not tenable, so you'll have to have probably one or the other, along with the armed forces in government, you might be able to have a high legitimacy. But you can always take Beijing for the legitimacy for having the head of state and government bonus. It's not going to, like Parliamentary Republic, let you switch which guy's the ruler as well. And so, or we can actually still have Parliamentary Republic, that's right, and have distribution of power. We just get to have it all. I think. I'm not sure exactly how that'll work. But okay, these are the changes I think will happen as a result of the laws, which kind of change the metagame, but it is unclear exactly how you, since no interest group base supports it, it's unclear how you might necessarily, be able to even go to technocracy, but just some food for thought. Now we'll just kind of quickly go through what I think the best laws are, and then we will talk about kind of the economic phases as well as expansion in the early game, where I think the best spots are. So I think Parliamentary Republic is best, specifically if you are using a voting system, which this might change it in 1.3 because you're going technocracy, but if you're using a voting system, this allows you to always have the head of state and government and kind of have stuff in the control you want. What you give up relative to presidential is quite a bit of authority, so it's not zero sacrifice. Parliamentary Republic is good for like the first half of the game. After that, Council Republic becomes best, and this has to do with, as we'll talk about when we talk about phases, it has to do with this investment pool modifier changing throughout the game, but that's kind of the idea. Currently, I think census suffrage is actually best, because if you go universal suffrage, generally the trade unions become hyper caked up, and you don't quite want them this big, because you are trying, it would be preferable to have this triple balance between intelligentsia, trade unionists, and industrialists. And so I think census suffrage is generally best, not universal suffrage. Multiculturalism is just best. It allows you to do more migration. It's not close. Total separation, same thing. Elected bureaucrats, I believe, is best overall. You can make some argument for appointed bureaucrats, but overall this one saves you the most sort of bureaucracy when you are pushing the institutions high, which eventually you want to do. I think professional army is best. The 10% morale loss is nice. In some situations you want to go national militia and mass conscription, but we're not going to get into that. I think guaranteed liberties is best. I think that, the ability to force a lot of loyalists, which you will get with guaranteed libs, or will help you kind of contribute a lot to that, as well as having high legitimacy, will help you to have, really big bonus from having a lot of loyalists, which in turn allows you to harvest the bonuses off of your interest groups, which are particularly strong. Moving into economy, I think that early game laissez-faire is best, and then once the investment pool falls off, which we'll talk about, after this happens, then cooperative ownership becomes best. I believe command economy would be best hyper early, but you can't pass it hyper early, and by the time you can pass it, I think your GDP should be high enough that it's bad, because all the dividends from command economy just get erased, or like, to whatever extent you're running the malus from this investment pool thing, so we're multiplying all investments are multiplied by 0.3, this applies to all dividends, so it's just erasing a ton of money from your economy, and it's not good. For taxation level, I think graduated unlimited taxation is best. There in patch 1.1 there was kind of you can make an argument for like using a less progressive tax rate to pump more investment pool, but this doesn't work this way anymore. For colonization, I think colonial exploitation is best, especially when paired with unique buildings like the Mosque of Brunei, as well as if you want to make space marines in unincorporated states, because their offense and defense will also get the throughput bonus from colonial exploitation, but the extra 2% education access on Mosque of Brunei is good, in addition to just getting more resources from unincorporated states as they incorporate. In theory, if you wanted to play hyper sweaty, it's probably worth it to actually incorporate places, let them get to 19 years into the incorporation, and then turn it off and reincorporate just so you can get the 10% throughput in some situations, while still, getting roughly half the benefits of incorporation over the course of time. We already talked about this one. I think dedicated police force is best. There's some situations where it's good to go the other ones. Notably, local police force is really good if you're conquering a lot, and you also don't want to have the police force up higher than level 3, because this will give you the biggest minus from state penalties from turmoil. I'm not sure if you swap onto it if you can maintain the level 5, but each one of these will give +2 max level, and the local police does not. For education system, I think private schools are best, once you get to a certain point, but because you will spend most of the time not at that point, I think public schools are best, although assimilation's a negative mechanic on a couple fronts. It helps to empower the petite bourgeoisie, and it also kind of messes with you in terms of if your primary culture has an obsession or a taboo, this will make a higher percentage of pops consume in an inefficient way, such that it will lower their SOL. For health insurance, I generally like private health insurance the most. I like passing private health insurance as a means to make the industrialists a little bit happier in order to get their bonus kind of in the early to mid game, which is not the same as the law being best, but I also think that you generally don't want to crank to max level of health insurance until you're already starting to come up on a pretty high SOL anyways. And if you're on a high SOL, then private health insurance will give you a greater decrease in mortality per wealth. For free speech, I think that if you are a country that's generally pretty far ahead, that rights of assembly is probably decent, but protected speech, the increased technology spread, especially if you're overbuilding on universities, is incredibly strong. For labor rights, I think regulatory bodies is best, mainly because I think that minimum wages not a very good mechanic right now, and you want to have this at the highest level anyways, so you get minus 100% dangerous working conditions, and I don't think you want 75% minimum wage, although you can do some minimum wage, but it tends to cause problems. There are a lot of bugs. You can use protectionism and this sort of stuff to try and protect your economy, to make workers' protections work, but overall, I think if you're injecting money into your economy, it's better to inject via more construction than through welfare. For children's rights, compulsory primary schools best, education institution investment strong. For rights of women, women's suffrage is best. Workforce ratios are a particularly strong mechanic, as well as dependent enfranchisement. The birth rate's negative. You can maybe make an argument that this isn't best on specifically China, but that's kind of it. For welfare, I think that a majority of the game you kind of just stay on poor laws. It's better to be getting the bonus from the industrialists being happy than necessarily moving on to old age pension or towards it, I think. But the trade unionists tend to have better bonuses, and so I like kind of passing poor laws to make the industrialists happy, and then if I need to make the trade unionists happy, passing wage subsidies and then passing old age pension, kind of one at a time, just as a means to kind of finagle and be able to get a decent support from these guys so I can try and get their bonuses, because if they give a lot of approval, it'll be nice. For migration, no migration controls is best. Unless you are on a country where you discriminate against a majority of your people and they would otherwise leave, in which case staying on migration controls would be decent. I believe you have to be on no migration controls to trigger the new Colossus event. But if once you're on multiculturalism, there's not a I do not believe there's a technical difference between these two, although I'm not 100% sure. In terms of what it explicitly says in terms of the mechanics, there should be no difference, but I always end up passing no migration controls anyways. And then finally, you want to ban slavery. And that's kind of like where it is with the laws. And so that's kind of the situation, and next up, we will talk about either expansion or the economy. Alright, next up we're going to talk about expansion. Now there's two ways to think of expansion. Either high infamy expansion, where you're looking to get the most value for each of your maneuvers in each of your wars, and low infamy expansion, where you are mostly concerned with getting as much as you can for the infamy you get, which kind of has two parameters. Infamy is based on the target place's pop, and also if they're recognized and unrecognized, and also how powerful they are. And so generally speaking, you want to go for low population, high resource areas, because they will give a lot. A good example of this is, for example, Sinai, which has almost no population here, but also has, resources in iron and lead, and also kind of has the strategic Suez Canal, which is worth noting. In patch 1.3, we have two upcoming changes that kind of change this calculation, so we'll talk about those first, and that is the inclusion of opium in some territories. And also, so added opium growing potential to the Ottoman Empire, generally not worth taking because they start off recognized and they have high pops. Mexico, this is interesting and makes puppeting Mexico early even stronger than it was. New Granada, which I thought was already a really strong expansion spot, it's gotten better. And Van Diemen's Land. Also notably here is added coal and gold potential to Morocco and Sahara. So let's jump back into the game and talk about, kind of what might be good here now with all this, and then also what might be the case here. So if we go to, let's say, Dominion here against them, it's 20 infamy, so this is quite a big chunk of infamy, but depending on how much gold is actually here, there's already a decent amount of iron and lead and sulfur here in Morocco, such that, going after them can be a decent idea, and if the gold is substantive, this will actually be a pretty solid Dominion / puppet. You can go early for one of the higher infamy plays. But also, going after Sahara might become good, in which case, the map for Algeria will change in 1.3 here, but going for Algeria, so that you can kind of colonize here in the Sahara, might become extremely strong, or it might become a strategy, depending on how much gold is here. They didn't tell us the numbers. If it's, 5 gold is a different thing than, 15 gold that you get in, Orangey, which is, I think, the highest gold state. It might be Nevada. But this changes, this North African region to become a lot more important insofar as the early expansion goes. And so this is kind of a good thing. And also New Granada, I think, was already, one of the better kind of puppets to take early on. If we take a Dominion look, it's only 15 infamy. You get access to the Panama Canal. They have some resources here. And their population will increase greatly because they're a New World country. And if you take a look at one of their states and look at the population, their attraction should be high because they have a lot of unused arable land, which is the case for all of the New World, and so their population will really grow over time quite aggressively, and so going after them early also gives you the Panama Canal. It's only 15 infamy. This gets even better knowing that they have opium, and if they have a lot of opium potential, if there's opium potentials on almost all of their land, specifically this 100 stack here, 76 here, 45 here, if there's opium available in all of these, that's going to be really, really nice, and so going after New Granada might become good. Now, if you're going to go high infamy, there's kind of a couple ones to talk about, and let's jump into them. The best war you can declare for a lot of infamy is transferring the East India Company to yourself if you're not Great Britain. Generally, the way you want to do this is you don't want to declare war on Great Britain to transfer the East India Company. Like if we take a look here, we can't. Interactions. If we declare war, let's say ban slavery on the Great Britain directly, all of their subjects will come in and all their allies will come in. If we declare war on one of their subjects, let's say on New South Wales, to transfer the subject, we only have to fight Great Britain and New South Wales. So thing one is you want to declare the war on a subject, particularly weak subject, and then add on top of that, transfer the East India Company. You specifically also want to declare it on a place where there won't be a lot of people who have an interest in the region, so Oceania is a pretty good example. Generally speaking, Germany and France won't have interest in Oceania, so if you declare as the primary war goal, transfer, New South Wales on Great Britain, then no one else can join against you, and so this is kind of the best high infamy war, and you can do it in this way to make sure no other GPs join against you, and then on the next one you'll have the East India Company on your side. Now another particularly good relatively high infamy war is dominioning the Netherlands. And the reason why is if you dominion the Netherlands, this is actually tenable. It's only 26 infamy. They start out a major power. They will often decay to minor power. But if you dominion the Netherlands, you will also transfer with that the dominion over the Dutch East Indies, which is worth even more than the Netherlands. If we tried to just transfer them, it would be 76 infamy. And so this is a particularly good expansion spot. If you're kind of looking for like the higher infamy plays, another way to look at it also is just, you know, sort by whichever minor power is biggest, just puppeting them. So puppeting Sweden would be good, puppeting Brazil, Belgium, Sardinia, Piedmont, if you're going high infamy. But if you want to go low infamy, there's kind of the tried and true tested spots of Borneo is extremely strong, specifically Brunei. Brunei will give you land access to Landfang, which is in the Great Qing market, and so that market access is particularly good. Also, the market access you get from Montenegro into both Austria and the Ottoman Empire is nice. It's market access in the sense that you can run overland trade routes and that use no convoys, and so conquering Montenegro is extremely good. Again, really low population here, and so it's not a lot of infamy, but all of Borneo is really good, really rich in resources. The western portion of Borneo will have gold, the eastern portion will have oil, and so Brunei is probably the best early game expansion spot. Also having oil eventually is Bahrain and Nejd, as well as Persia, although Persia generally takes more infamy, but these are kind of some low infamy spots. And then of course we have the classic Zulu into Transvaal and Orange. Transvaal and Orange both have an enormous amount of gold, and taking this pretty early is extremely good. You could also look to specifically take gold off of Mexican states. This isn't something I've really done too much in the past, but I think that you could probably go for California, like this type of stuff. Let's just take a quick look here at how much that costs. Conquer State Nevada is 7 infamy, so that's not too bad. Nevada and California will have a lot of infamy. California is a really valuable province. I haven't really utilized this strategy too much, but okay. Also relatively good is puppeting Argentina and Chile, which will not cost a lot of infamy early on. You'll see 8. Generally, they will grow quite a lot, and they will get all of this colonization done, so they'll have even more land. Also, what I learned from the Brazil run is apparently Brazil will be, or Bolivia will always absorb Peru, or they're the ones that absorb Peru. So you can go after dominioning specifically Bolivia early on, and then when they absorb Peru, you will get that absorption effectively for free. And so this can be also another kind of low infamy expansion that is somewhat similar to going after the Netherlands in order to get all of the Dutch East Indies. And these, I think, are the best expansion spots. You know, if you're looking to expand the customs union, that's a little bit of a different thing. And then like Persia, Mexico, Brazil, like these types of stuff becomes good. But I've talked about this before, and this is currently where I think the best spots to expand in the game are. And I'm interested to see if Morocco and New Granada in particular have that extra juice and that extra bump to become good expansion spots. So this idea of economic phases is quite a lot to unpack, but I think it's important for understanding how your development of your economy over time will change, and I think that understanding this is essential for playing kind of as effectively as possible currently in patch 1.2, and a lot of this idea kind of centers around this idea of the investment pool, and that this multiplier is going to shift over time. And so if you are below 10 million, this multiplier will actually be positive, and then eventually it caps out at, or bottoms out at 0.3 if you are at a 2 billion GDP. It is going to be based on your GDP, and what this means is various inflection points are created as this gets less and less efficient. Now, early on, the investment pool is going to be a huge portion of the amount of money you're getting in order to support construction. The investment pool change you see is changing by 9K here, and this is going to be a giant portion of our income very early on. If we take a look at kind of like the earlier tax rates, such as land-based taxation, which is just a flat tax on land, this is not taxing dividends, and a tax on income, this is not very good at extracting money from what's going on based on the profitability or the weekly balance of our buildings. We want to try and drive up weekly balance, but we're not extracting it from per capita taxation very well. But what every owner will do is they will spend some of the money into this investment pool. And so what the name of the game early on is going to be getting all your investment pools stuff onto privately owned. That is capitalists, because capitalists will contribute 20% of their dividends to the investment pool. No matter what, 20% is extracted from them, but then it can be further modified by modifiers. the shopkeepers will only contribute 5%, and the landowners or the aristocrats will contribute 10%. And so the idea is you want to get as high a proportion of your buildings as possible to be capitalist owned. That way they're contributing as much as possible. And this is super, super key early on, as you are kind of on a tax system that is not very good at extracting money based on dividends being higher. In Victoria 3, you try and drive the dividends higher, but you're not really rewarded in the earlier tax systems. If we take a look at kind of the later tax systems like per capita taxation, you will see that the income tax rate gets higher, and that we go from 7% income tax to on per capita. Now we're taxing per capita. We're also taxing land still a little bit, but now we're just taxing 15%. If we go to proportional, now the income tax rate goes up again, but we're also now taxing dividends. So now wealth is being extracted based on the dividends, and graduated taxation, I believe, lowers income tax rate, but increases dividend tax rate here. And so this will allow you to extract more based on profitability. You're trying to turn up profitability, but you're not as rewarded earlier on. Except through the investment pool transfer. It's important to note that this investment pool transfer, right now we're seeing that it's being modified by a negative number here, 0.99. And it's actually not going to be negative for us in practice, because they transfer 20% no matter what once they're a capitalist. This one's not a capitalist, but let's pretend this is on privately owned. When they are transferring 20%, that's how much is extracted from them no matter what. But it can be modified by efficiency modifiers, and there's two notable modifiers you're going to almost always have, and that is in the economic system, you're going to want to go laissez-faire, which will jump this number by 25%, and you are also going to want to get your capitalists both happy and powerful, and if they are happy and powerful, they will be giving 20% investment pool contribution efficiency. It says 10% here, but if the clout's over 20, the bonuses and maluses are both doubled. And so you will be getting 45% extra juice. And what this means is, it looks like this number is like roughly 100%, but this extra 45% juice is effectively like free money and is really closer to 144% or 145% than this number listed here. Okay, this number will decrease, as we said, as you approach 2 billion. Before you get to 10 million, it will actually be positive. So if we take a look at Jabal Shamar and just switch to this country real quick, we will see they have an enormous modifier here. They are getting modified by 3x. So for every 100 ducats or whatever the capitalist puts into the investment pool, for every 100 ducats you get 300 out. And so this is free money, this multiplier. If we switch to China, which has the largest GDP at game start, you will see it's around 95% is going to be kind of the multiplier here. So it's going to be 95%. And so this decreasing multiplier is going to make it less and less and less effective. Roughly speaking, for every 28 million your GDP grows, you will lose 1% of efficiency from the investment pool transfer. This creates a couple of thresholds, notably at 69%, nice, roughly speaking, you will be break even in terms of how much investment pool transfer is occurring, even if you have the powerful job creator industrialist and are on laissez-faire. But before you get to, that 69% modifier, which you reach at roughly 881 million GDP, before you get to 881 million GDP, you are getting free money when it is going through capitalist hands, when the capitalists are the owners of the building, when it's going through their hands, all of the positive weekly balance is being multiplied, and you're getting money out of nothing. Okay, and so this is kind of informs your strategy early on, where you try and be very capitalist oriented. You export the capitalist owned buildings goods to increase the prices, to increase their profits, and you import the agrarian owned building goods to decrease the price, decrease the profits, and try and encourage your automatic queue to build more capitalist owned buildings and discourage it from building agrarian buildings. And so this marks like the first phase of the game where you are just really all in on the capitalist, because investment pool is a modifier that is going to be like, it is extra free juiced. And so you would rather have the money go in that direction. But you start to hit inflection points in the game. And this is what I mean by phases. And the first kind of inflection point you reach when there's like a convergence of several factors. So first of all, it's when you get onto proportional taxation and you start being able to extract dividends. And so as a proportion of the money you are getting rewarded, you are going to be extracting less from the investment pool transfer specifically, but also when you get on proportional taxation, this is dividends tax rate, not capitalist dividends tax rate, it's dividends tax rate. So this makes agrarian buildings better in terms of giving you more money into your kind of what you can control so that you can use it for construction. Now, it's not going to, if you're under 881 million, it's not going to be free juiced, but it is going to be controlled money, and controlled money is preferable because you can dedicate it to construction, or it's generally preferable, but let's kind of skim over that for now. So this is going to be like thing one, but also there are going to be a couple technologies that are incredibly good for increasing the value of agrarian goods, and that is specifically when you research pumpjacks. Automatic irrigation basically doubles the output of all of your plantations. And also, improved fertilizer is really, really good for boosting the grain, although I don't think I think you still don't want to focus grain early. So these two techs, alongside, there's a third tech as well. Let's talk about it. The third tech is going to be mutual funds, which will make a third of the ownership of all of the agrarian stuff. It will make a third of it into capitalist owned. And so once you're on this, then the agrarian stuff being capitalist owned means that some of it is going to be juiced in the same way the capitalist juice. The plantation, this pumpjacks being extremely efficient is going to be really good. And as you know, you start to shift over to the later tax rates, you get mutual funds, and also you approach 881 million inflection point, you start to want to shift towards agrarian stuff a little bit more. And I think what the strategy becomes kind of like in this transitionary period is you are going to want to set in a few auto expands so that your agrarian stuff will slowly expand. You're not committing to it when it's really profitable, but it will also, if you have an auto expand on, it will also cause greater specialization, which will give throughput, which is particularly nice on all the agrarian stuff because it increases the inputs and the outputs. Generally, there's not a lot of inputs for agrarian stuff, so it's just raw increasing the outputs, and so you manage to kind of abuse throughput. Okay, and then eventually you start reaching a point where you may be still on. This is kind of, we're talking about a third phase here. Maybe you're still on proportional, maybe you've gotten on to graduated, where now you're getting an even larger dividends tax rate, and you're starting to care less about the investment pool transfer. Maybe you're past 880 million, or maybe you're around close to it, and then you start leaning into the agrarian stuff a little bit more. I still think you focus more on the capitalist stuff still, until you kind of reach a particularly big malus, but you focus on the agrarian stuff more, and now you start caring about something other than investment pool transfer. And we've kind of talked about this on various other videos. We're just going to jump into our spreadsheet here, but so this what is it, column here denotes how much construction efficiency or how much investment pool transfer you are getting per construction per building. And this is kind of the primary mover, or how you evaluate in the first two phases. You really care about how much IPT you are getting per construction, because the IPT is generally positively modified in capitalist buildings, but once you hit 880 million, it becomes less about this and more about this number here, which is net construction efficiency. This is the outputs of the building minus the inputs. We're not controlling for labor here. It's not that nuanced of a spreadsheet, but what this is going to do is we are talking about increasing the GDP here. As a greater share of our money is starting to come from taxes and less from investment pool, GDP becomes more important, and so we shift towards caring about the net construction or the net value created per construction. And so the very, very most efficient good, for example, when you are evaluating under this, so notably, the agrarian stuff is very efficient per construction, and the very best one is opium per construction. And so this is going to kind of change things where you are, you know, as you start to incur a negative malus, maybe you're at like 1 billion GDP, you stop caring about the investment pool and you start caring about GDP. Okay, well, what might change in 1.3? Let's go back to the law. Actually, we got to go back to the browser. I take it all back. Let's go to this law. Land reform might change. They didn't show us the numbers for land reform, and so it's a little bit tough. But if land reform allows you to make capitalist-owned agrarian buildings, then suddenly the value of like kind of forcing construction efficiency per investment pool. If you can make stuff entirely owned by the capitalists, then the agrarian stuff gets way, way, way better because it's generally really, really efficient. And so, And so these might be important, or just to kind of look at, as soon as you get in, what's going to be a lot in terms of, or like, what the ownership's going to look like, what the PMs are going to look like. They didn't show us the PMs. They just showed it unlocks multiple new PMs, which might be significant. And so, like, this is a third phase where you're starting to lean in a little bit. And then I think there's a fourth phase. And let's jump back into the game and talk about the fourth phase. At a certain point, you actually don't want money to be going into the investment pool. Because as this gets negative, or as this modifier gets worse and worse and worse, you know, at 69% is roughly break even, right? The money that's getting fed into it is getting fed into being able to be used for construction, and it's still fine. But, you know, if it's at like 50%, even with that plus 45% modifier you're getting from the industrialists being happy with you and from being on laissez-faire, can't make up for the fact that it's modified by 50%. And this money the capitalists are contributing to the investment pool, they always contribute the same amount, they always contribute 20% of their dividends, but because of this modifier is just erasing money from the economy. So at a certain point, you actively want to change ownership somehow to people that are less capitalist oriented. Now, this I think will let you do that, and you can switch to rural folk and farmers, which are going to only contribute 5% of their investment pool, and I actually think this will be really good. Kind of in this fourth phase where you are trying to want to decrease the investment pool transfer, because the investment pool transfer is erasing money from the economy. And, well, what do I mean by that? Like, in terms of erasing money, isn't just a little bit still good? No, you would rather they not contribute it and instead have more money to spend, and this money would drive up consumption, and the consumption would increase the prices of buildings, and it would make buildings more profitable. People would pay out more. You'd be taxing more through dividends and this sort of stuff, because as you increase the overall velocity of your economy and your economy becomes more about consumption, you know, you are still getting the full 20% dividends and the full 35% dividends tax rate off your taxes. And so it becomes more about velocity. It becomes less about investment pool and more about velocity and GDP. And so in this fourth phase, you actively want to decrease it. You might be able to actively decrease it, you know, through this new homesteading law. And it would be interesting if there's like eventually an equivalent to get stuff less capitalist owned. But currently in game, what you do after, I'm not sure what exact threshold you want to think about it. I kind of think of it as like 1.2, 1.3 billion GDP. You get to this point where you want to go Council Republic. Because once you go Council Republic, and this is independent of other considerations regarding Council Republic. We're just talking about the economy. Council Republic will make the AI more aggressive towards you, and so you might want to kind of avoid it for a little while longer to make sure that your customs union stays big. There are other considerations at play, but just in terms of economy, you know, 1.2, 1.3 billion GDP, I think is roughly the point where you want to go Council Republic. Maybe a little bit earlier than that, but that's kind of, I think it's a decent way to think about it, because this will allow the system of cooperative ownership, which will, well, first of all, it does juice up the investment pool contribution efficiency of both farmers and shopkeepers, but it makes all of the owners farmers and shopkeepers, which only contribute 5% of their money to the investment pool. That means they're spending the other 95% on consumption, and so even though you are eating like this negative modifier, that you have a really big negative modifier now from all investments are being multiplied negatively, it's going to be, you're spending less money, the consumption's better. Now, the consumption profile might not be as good. This is kind of like a separate discussion, and it's too much to unpack, but just thinking of it in this way, that eventually you're trying to get off of the investment pool, I think is worth it. And you kind of come out with like maybe these like 4 phases or 4 inflection points you're kind of thinking about when you're thinking about this sort of stuff. And this is these ideas, at least for me, developed a lot over the course of 1.2, whereas in 1.1 you didn't have this negative modifier and you just cared about blasting investment pool contribution, and like you could stay on per capita taxation to juice up the industrialists. The tax, notably, it was not always taking 20%. It was, and then modifying it positively. So this makes the 1.2 change makes it even more explosive and good investment pool. It makes an investment pool even more explosive and good early on, like if you're under 500 million GDP, and significantly worse later, like if you're over 1 billion GDP, something like this. And so I think it's worth thinking about it in this way, and moving forward, that's probably going to be how you think about developing the economy. And, you know, once you hit kind of this phase 4 like idea where you really would rather not have a lot of investment pool, also agrarian stuff starts to get better again, even better than the capitalist oriented stuff. Now there's like also problems like you can't build vertical as tall, you're not getting as much in terms of the throughput generally, and like these types of stuff that it's like a bit much to unpack. But overall, I think the metagame of building your economy is you focus on resources first because they are the most efficient for investment pool transfer. These are, you know, the chopping industries, all the resource industries in the resource tab, more than the manufacturing, are better. And then you go to the industry because you kind of tapped out the resources, or you need to push demand for the resources. And then you avoid agriculture like the plague, but you eventually hit an inflection point where agriculture becomes okay-ish when you get mutual funds combined with you know, both improved fertilizer and pumpjacks, and then you start dabbling a little bit, and then you hit a point where you don't really care that much about the investment pool anymore. You care more about GDP, but you don't actively want to tank the investment pool. And so you kind of switch to, again, more agrarian. And then the phase 4 is you actively want to decrease the investment pool transfer. You should actually, I guess in theory, you would also want to turn off publicly traded on the farms. But moving into 1.3, the change is going to be, you're going to switch to an ownership PM that is going to be, you know, more farmer-owned buildings, because they are going to contribute less to the investment pool, which will help to drive up consumption and improve GDP, more velocity, these types of things. And so I think that this is kind of the way to think about it overall. Obviously, a lot was left unpacked, or not, sorry, a lot was left packed, not unpacked. Yeah, that's not unpacked. And, you know, probably going to make more videos on this, especially if people kind of want more explanation. But I think that this is just, it's super important and interesting to understand that what becomes best is going to change. And in particular, some people really love command economy. The people who love command economy, I think, are never getting an enormous GDP. My understanding is that the modifier doesn't cap out at 0.3, it caps out at 0.2, or this is what I was told for command economy. And so command economy is really, really, really good if your GDP is not very good. And like if you were like... if you have a 2 billion GDP and you go command economy, 70% of all dividends are just being erased. And it's all the dividends, because all the dividends go into, you know, the government pool, because it's government ownership. So it's not 20% like it is with the capitalists that are being contributed to the IPT. Instead, it's 100% that's being contributed to government dividends, and then 70% or 80% of that's being erased because of this negative modifier. So I think that usually if you are actually playing really well, by the time you can go command economy, it probably blows. But that's kind of a different thing. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're as excited for 1.3 as I am. And feel free to like, comment, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell. And if you've been sitting watching this entire time, you've probably been sitting a little while. So maybe get up and take a walk. It's good for your health. It increases your heart rate, increases brain activity, like all these kinds of things. All good. And other than that, have a good day.